And the Lord said to Aaron, "Go into the wilderness to meet Moses." And he went and met him in the mount of God and kissed him. And Moses told Aaron all the words of the Lord who had sent him and all the signs which he had commanded him. I got to stop there for a second. I do not understand what happens in the section with Zipporah. So,
can I offer?
Yes, please do. I thought you might have some insights into that.
So let me do it narratively for you first, and then maybe you can get a sense of what is going on here. So what's happening here is actually the same thing that happened with the rod and the snake. And it's the same thing that happened with the diseased hand and the let's say healed hand in the heart. Okay, so and it's the same thing as removing the sandals, that Moses removes his sandals as he goes into the burning bush, and it's ultimately the same thing as escaping Egypt and going up the mountain. It is about removing the foreign and finding the heart. And so the circumcision is the garment of skin that is removed in order to reveal the central rod. Okay? But it's also the mark of the foreigner, at least for Israel. It is that the way that I recognize someone's not one of us is because he's got that garment of skin. So you remove the garment of skin, but that removal of the garment of skin is all about this idea.
So that exposes the rod. That's the circumcision
That's right.
idea.
Circumcision. It's the snake that becomes the rod. It's all of these things together.
And a return to Eden.
To return to Eden, because you remove the garments of skin and you enter into, so the same. He removes the sandals.
So it's an exacerbation of nakedness.
Yeah,
the circumcision.
To the prelapsarian, the pre-fall state of
Isn't it also an inoculation, like the blood for God to pass over on Passover on the door when she touches him with the blood?
I don't know. I've never thought about that particularly.
But if you think about it, I mean, when she says she cast it at his feet, and in other...
But it's the sandals. He removed his sandals to get into... So it's a relationship between this garments of skin and the feet. It's the bottom of your body.
I read somewhere that feet is also...
There's sexuality related to it as well.
Isn't feet code for aren't there different interpretations of what that means?
Well, not in this case, but
in Ruth.
The word is generally regel, which doesn't mean much here, but the holidays, for example, when the Jews would go to Jerusalem by foot are called feet. The Shalosh Regalim, the three festivals are the 3 feet. I don't know if that helps you in any way.
But it's in the story of Ruth and Boaz. In the story of Ruth and Boaz, Ruth uncovers Boaz's feet.
So there's a sexual connotation.
That is a sexual connotation.
Okay, so in part of this is...
She uncovers, it's related to it's related to circumcision.
But there's a painting of him in a certain regard that allows God to pass over and not kill him.
I don't think it's that the God was going to kill, my understanding is that God is going to kill his son.
That is so to be completely unhelpful, I'll just tell you that when I wrote my commentary, I perused everything I could find. We don't know exactly, and we don't know that in particular.
Right.
Was it Moses or the son?
Maybe ambiguity is also...
That's right. That's exactly right. The fact is, though, that she saved them.
Yeah.
That's important.
Okay,
And
so
it's also
Zipporah
that-
saves... Okay, because I don't understand
Because she's not Israelite, by the way.
That's
She's
right.
she's also a
She's
foreign woman.
Midianite, right.
She's a foreign woman. But
Another foreign woman.
Yeah, the
Another woman and
Egyptians,
another foreigner.
Who saved the day.
It has to do with spoiling the Egyptians in a certain manner as well, because here's now the foreign woman who is properly removing that which is, let's say, improperly foreign, but let's say keeping that which is properly foreign, because she is a foreign woman, and Moses only has, at least that we know, only has foreign wives. Right, and so it's not. We have to be careful because we don't want to say like you have to just remove the strange. No, it's a more subtle relationship. It's that you have to remove the strange that's not part of the system. So think of a basketball team.
All the strange that is part of the system.
So think of a basketball team, right? If you have bad players, you have to get rid of them. If they don't fit, you don't want people doing something else while you're practicing basketball. If you got someone practicing the accordion, it's like, no, that's strange. Remove it from the basketball practice, please. But you have to keep your eyes open for that which is new and potential and not part of your system, so that you can integrate the proper strange into the world.
Isn't that something rather simple and basic does often? I read in the rabbis, what was the sign of the covenant for Abraham.
This is the sign of the covenant.
It was circumcision.
The circumcision.
But the question is,
clearly,
why is
right.
that a sign of the
In
covenant?
fact, the Hebrew,
No, but in
you
other
all
words-
know the word bris, or many of
Yeah.
you. First, it's called the circumcision, but bris means covenant.
Yeah.
It's brit milah. It is the covenant of circumcision.
But doesn't the point here that a lot of people make is that here's the leader and his son is not circumcised?
That's right. It
And
is
so
an
it's
issue.
time he
Yes, God
took on
hello.
the sign of the covenant.
Yeah, that's part of it, definitely.
the great prophet.
What I was saying we don't know is we don't know why God got so angry, and we don't know at whom.
Yeah,
That
it
your
looks like
point.
there's a piece of the story that's
That's
missing. It
right.
feels
That's
that way in the narrative.
And by the way, whenever I've come to that, it's not often, where there's a piece clearly missing to us, I always console myself because I want to understand everything, but not everything in life, but everything in the Torah. But with this, it clearly was clear to them. The Torah has an incredible task, and so does all biblical literature, but the Torah is the oldest. It had to be important and meaningful to people in the late Bronze Age and to us. And that it succeeds is argument 56 for me, that it's a divine text. But they undoubtedly understood this story better than we do.
But Dennis, would you also say that it's part of Scripture and divine revelation that it's both accessible, easy for an ordinary person to understand,
That's good.
and yet hard enough
That's right.
for philosophers
That's why we're
to
sitting
to
around.
not
Right, that's
right.
it's a Jacob's
He's the
ladder.
regular Joe. I like that. That cracked me up. Yes.
Well, and as the regular Joe, I just want to point out, the words in the book here that it's only verse 14 in which the anger of the Lord is kindled against Moses. It's only verse 24 that the Lord met him and sought to kill him. And relative to Moses's, let's say, the instability in his will, do I really have to do it? I think this ritual marking is very important. I mean, if the book in a way is about the conforming or the revelation of this sovereign principle of all reality and the conforming of us or the Israelites in relation to that,
Despite our
inadequacies, I mean, it can't be just an existential thing. Well, I kind of feel like today, I feel like I don't. And in a way, the ritual marking is a way of saying, here I am.
Well, it's a sacrifice. It's a
Yes,
real
it's a
sacrifice and a
sacrifice.
marker that's permanent. So
And it conveys the important point that leaders are not exempt.
Yes.
They don't get
Yes.
special privileges.
Yes.
well, and
They've
the
got-
point too that you're not exempt from the divine commandment despite your inadequacies. Because that can be an excuse, right? It's like, well, it can't be me. Look at the problems with me. It's like, yeah, you're full of problems, man. It's amazing you can even ambulate, but that doesn't put you outside the divine order.
I think you'll find it of interest on a human level. I don't cry often. I cried at both my son's circumcisions. And I'm not big into prayer, which is my own problem. I fully acknowledge I'm much more into study. But I was overwhelmed by being part of this tradition from Abraham to the present. That Jews did this in concentration camps, in pogroms, and I'm doing it as well in California in the 21st or 20th century. I just want you to know how much it means to many Jews. And I fully acknowledge it transcends the rational. That
Well, we're trying to understand why. to
part
some
of
degree.
something so much bigger than me. I'm continuing this people that has been, the bush that is not consumed but burned all the time. So just I thought you'd find that of interest because how powerful it can be.
So the narrative picks up
By the way,
again.
forgive me. I got a call from a guy in San Francisco. This is the joy of doing a radio show, who is the head of No Circ, which, needless to say, would be in San Francisco. Not only anti-circumcision, but was working to have his foreskin restored. And I will never forget I was a little, it's very hard to stun me after all these years of radio. And I said, I'm sorry, did I get that right? You are working to restore your foreskin? And then I don't normally insult callers. I just said, you must be very bored. And that was the end of that
I love that it's
conversation.
called No Cirque, and he called into like, your show's like Cirque du Soleil. It's like a celebration. He needs some branding help.
All right, so back to the main narrative by all appearances. And the Lord said to Aaron, go into the wilderness to meet Moses. And he went and met him in the mount of God. Okay, so that's in the proper place, and kissed him. And Moses told Aaron all the words of the Lord who had sent him, and all the signs which he had commanded him. And Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders of the children of Israel. And so that's the next move down that hierarchy. Eh? And Aaron spake all the words which the Lord had spoken unto Moses, and did the signs in the sight of the people. And the people believed. And when they heard that the Lord had visited the children of Israel, and that he had looked upon their affliction, then they bowed their heads and worshipped. So now the message has been translated
Right, but
down
it's
the
only,
mountain.
and the reaction, this is the reaction, because we've talked about this before as well, is that when we say act as if God exists, I always insist that acting as if God exists is not first a moral question. It's a question of where your attention is and what you celebrate. Mm-hmm. Worship is the first reaction of the realization of God, and it's not moral. It's pre-moral, right? It is the just recognizing that this is the source of all things, that I am in contact with it, and that sense of awe, throws me to the ground in prostration.
Pre-moral and pre-rational.
Yeah.
What's interesting, or leaps you to your feet in enthusiasm. Yeah. That's what people do when someone scores a goal, and it's because there's that archetypal element of hitting the targets. Like if you're up and worshiping before. That's why people go there, is to have that experience. They don't know they're participating in the divine in that game, but they wouldn't be going there and paying that money and watching this if it wasn't a form of worship, because it's a form of worship.
What's necessary too I'm going to use the term conversion loosely, but if you're gathering more people down the hierarchy, like you're saying, is you need to embody in word and deed. Right. So this is part of what happened. Because on the one hand, you can look at it, what more proof do you need, right? But we're reading this in the Bible in real time. These are fairly insane propositions that are being presented. So it's important that
dangerous ones too.
Right. So you have Aaron and you have Moses coming down, and they're proving this aspect of faith in word and deed. Right. So that's a call to a certain purity of leadership if you want to be a role model or a leader. And
if you want to bring the people out of tyranny instead of establishing one, right? So part of you has to be in touch with the divine, and that would be the open attention part, I would say, in some sense. And then part of you has to be able to speak magic words, and that combination, if it's genuine, that's enough to lead people out of tyranny. So, and then that is something to pray for all the time with political leadership. And you can see sometimes we have one or the other. You have a man who's a good man, clearly, but who just can't communicate it. We've met political leaders like that in Washington. Impeccable moral character, but not convincing.
That's right. And the number one thing when we poll the American public about what their biggest issues are with political leadership, it's always hypocrisy and corruption.
Right. So they're Aarons without Moses.
Right.
Right. And that's why they can produce the golden calf, for example.
So solidity of deed and word.
Yeah. And it's so interesting here that's so complicated to manage together that they have to be parsed into two people for that to be managed in the text. And afterward, Moses and Aaron went in and told Pharaoh, "Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, let my people go." And you said there was trickery in this, "that they may hold a feast unto me in the wilderness." And Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice to let Israel go?" And that's exactly what you expect from a tyrant. It's like, well, I'm God here. It's like, what are you talking about? These are my slaves. I own them. Why should I be letting them go? Who's telling me this? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go. And they said, "The God of the Hebrews hath met with us. Let us go, we pray thee, 3 days' journey into the desert." That's out beyond the confines of civilization. "And sacrifice unto the Lord our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword." And the king of Egypt said unto them, Wherefore do you, Moses and Aaron, let the people from their works? Get you unto your burdens. And Pharaoh said, Behold, the people of the land now are many, and you make them rest from their burdens. And Pharaoh commanded the same day the taskmasters of the people and their officers, saying, You shall no more give the people straw to make brick as heretofore. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. And the amount of the bricks which they did make heretofore, ye shall lay upon them. Ye shall not diminish aught thereof, for they be idle. Therefore they cry, saying, Let us go and sacrifice to our God. So you see, here it's quite interesting because the tyrant, the Pharaoh, is the opposite of Moses. In some sense, he's received a divine revelation because Moses, who's the agent of God, has come to him and said, what you're doing is wrong. Give us a bit of a break. And the Pharaoh, instead of just saying no, says, no, not just no. It's like, you want a little freedom? Here's a little more slavery. And so here, we'll just make it a little bit harder. And that's what you get for asking for, well, even a modicum of freedom. And so we know already that the Pharaoh is the kind of tyrant who will double down even in the presence of legitimate authority. Yeah, that's the definition of tyranny.
But you can see it fractally even at all levels within yourself. I think of an alcoholic who suddenly decides, I'm going to stop drinking, and then watch him a few days later, like binged out of his mind, right? It's like there's a sense in which anytime you try to free yourself from anything, the thing you're trying to free yourself from doesn't want to let you go. Not only doesn't want to let you go, but if you start to manifest like a desire to get away, it'll just bite down on you.
May I just note the feast and the sacrifice? This is partly a question for Dennis. I mean, let my people go that they may hold a feast unto me in the wilderness. And then the emphasis that let us go to sacrifice. I mean, these are primordial concepts, the notion of the feast.
Yeah, and the combination of the two, right? Because it's party and privation at the same time. It's that combination of...
Exactly. I once had a conversation with an anthropologist who worked on feasts, because we're the only animals who have meals. And he was working on these ancient sites, I think about 60,000 BC, where there are these circular remains where you can see that our ancestors started to eat together, because our kin in the rest of the animal kingdom, chimps or whatever, they do not look at each other when they eat. They certainly don't show their teeth to each other, and it's very hierarchical. So the alpha gives the food to the others and to the females, whatever. So this idea of the feast, the meal, eating together.
It's communal. Oh, yeah.
Communal.
Well, it's so interesting watching little kids. You know, when my daughter was like under 2, I would sometimes, just as a joke, take her dessert. And often she would shame me because I'd take her dessert and then I'd give it back and she'd say, here, Dad, you can have it. I'd think, oh, God, kid. She stopped doing that at about 3. So, and that was interesting too, because there was a developmental transformation that's typical. But one of the things that's absolutely, utterly striking about children, it's miraculous in some sense, is that they're really good at sharing food. And it's so deeply ingrained into us that, and part of the reason I've thought about this anthropologically and biologically is like, we weren't really big enough predators to be that successful against mammoths on our own. But 20 of us, we could take down a mammoth pretty well. We probably killed all of the mammoths in North America and in the northern, what is now the Soviet Union. It's pretty good for, naked apes. But the problem with a mammoth was, what, are you going to eat the whole thing? You can't really store it. And so what we learned to do in some real sense was store our excess hunting store in the bodies of other people. And that was the best way to do it. It's like, well, even if you're a great hunter, when you go out with your crew, you might not get an animal. Someone else might. No matter how good you are, you're not 100% successful. But if there's 20 of you, one of you is going to be successful just about every time. And so if you share the food, what you're really doing in the most fundamental sense is you're You're placing a moral obligation on someone else to share their future food with you. And it's preservation of food in the most fundamental way.